What happens when you are frustrated and angry to your brain? That's the question we're going to be answering today, and I'm so excited for you to meet a good friend of mine, Dr. Werner Horner. Now, Dr. Swarner is a chief psychiatrist in the Portland area. He's had a booming practice for nearly 40 years. I think we've been friends for about 30 of those. He's supervised me and taught me so much through the years as a mentor. And he's also trained physicians across the country on pharmacology and the magnificent intricacies of the human brain. And I'm happy to introduce you to Dr. Werner Horner. Welcome, Werner.
Thank you so much, Pam. It was such a delight for you to call me and say, hey, could I participate in this webinar? And when you said it was on anger, it was like my brain lit up. This is, as you and I have spoken many times, this is such an important subject, both emotionally and behaviorally. We'll get started, and I hope I can just stay on the topic. There's so much to cover.
Well, I know you have like 40 years plus another however many of experience in education on this. So help us, first of all, let's start and make it simple. Help us understand a little bit about how the brain circuits work.
Well, we can start with how complex the brain is, just as an amazing peek at what's inside our skull. The brain is about 3 pounds of fatty tissue that floats inside our brain, and it's composed of about 100 billion, with B, neurons, which are individual little nerve cells. Each one of those nerve cells may have 10,000 or more connections with other nerve cells. And when you total that up, we are talking numbers that are in the quadrillions. I don't even know how many zeros that is. In terms of connections. So the brain is the most complex structure that we know of in the universe, including the universe. And it contains areas that work with memory, that work with sensory perception, that deal with these emotions and help us make judgments, prioritize things, and react. We're born with anger, working effectively by crying and saying, hey, I'm hungry and wet. But our brain has to work not just as individual little circuits, it has to work like a giant orchestra with all of the parts, all of the instruments playing in concert, or else it sounds like, well, you've been to an orchestra performance when they're all just tuning. Yeah. Can you imagine what 100 billion instruments would sound like if they were just all firing indiscriminately? That's how our brain would work if we don't organize things. So this is an exciting area to touch on and talk about.
One of the things that we've talked about before in the past is that neurons that fire together, wire together. Talk a little bit about that and the whole context of anger.
Well, that's what those 10,000 connections between each nerve cell is all about. That when a nerve is stimulated, it reaches out and connects with another nerve. That's all the neuron's job is, to vibrate, tickle, I call it, or quiet other nerves. And it does this by making these connections or disconnecting connections. Some of these connections we call memories, because when circuits all fire together, you have memory of something, of an event. It puts it all together for us. We don't know exactly how that works, but we don't have to. It's just the brain working together in concert to play a piece like the orchestra, and you have a memory. And the brain lays down these memories by connecting things. And the more you use certain circuits, the more, how should we say, more traveled those circuits become, the more ingrained they become, the more connections fire along those pathways, and the deeper and more richly innervated those pathways of memory or behavior or recall actually become.
So if I'm understanding you right, we know that thoughts are paired with emotion. So if we are ruminating or rehearsing a particular thought that's paired with anger, the more we think that thought and feel that emotion, the more that neural pathway gets practiced and it kind of becomes deeper or grooved into the brain, imprinted. And do we kind of move towards the path of least resistance? Does the mind or the brain more easily go that direction if it's been more rehearsed?
We certainly do. Our brain does what it's good at, and it keeps getting better at whatever it does. Whatever it rehearses, whatever it repeatedly does, it just naturally becomes more coordinated, more efficient at doing that, and more likely to go down those pathways repeatedly. It grabs what it can get as quickly as it can get and uses those most instinctively.
So we're talking to people, and perhaps some of those in our viewing audience have struggled with anger since as long as they can remember, maybe since they were a toddler, 2 years old. Is there hope here? Can we change that neurocircuitry and actually give it less power?
Well, we don't want to put the expectation out there to forget anger or to get rid of it.
Thank you.
It's essential. It's essential to our staying alive and to our functioning. Like we use the analogy of the baby being born and crying. If that baby doesn't cry, something wrong. It's got to be angry to survive. But how we use anger, anybody can be angry, right? Anybody. But how we refine that anger, how we encourage it, how we improve its wiring is a skill that's left to us to work on and to adapt and hopefully to really modify in much more positive ways to not just get what we want done, but to also lay down pathways and memories together with our behaviors that are more efficient and effective and produce a more beneficial life.
Yeah, I like that whole concept of quality of life, and enjoying life more with pleasant emotions. So let's get to some real practical tips here. What can those who are viewing, where do we begin?
Well, we can't undo memories, and memories accompany every experience, and experience is what we really identify emotions with. You see ice cream, and you remember you like ice cream, you like the flavor of it, you have a positive emotion linked to it. So emotions are linked with memories. They don't come separately. And what we want to encourage folks to realize is that you can't erase a bad memory, but you can begin replacing and encouraging positive associations with wanting something to change, which is what anger really is, with more positive types of emotional recall. And we can lay down positive emotional experiences, we can improve them, plus we can learn more efficient and effective behaviors, which I'm sure we're going to talk about quite a bit. And those behaviors we can actually rehearse and train our brains to be more likely to follow more effective pathways when those loud emotions of anger trigger intense reactions.
Loud emotions of anger. I like that. So anger's louder than some emotions. Is that accurate?
That's very accurate. I can't think of any emotion together as a big umbrella that contains more power than anger. Anger is the loudest. It makes the most noise in our brain. It's louder than being hungry, louder than separation, loss, rejection. It covers all those areas, and we should talk on that later.
Yeah, I think there's something very intoxicating about anger. We would much rather feel the power of anger than feeling powerless or feeling sad, which is why I think it makes anger such an easy go-to for a lot of us.
It definitely is, Pam. Anger is usually one of our first, I call it grabbing the gun out of our holster, reactions to any sort of threat, any type of rejection, any type of loss, as well as something being wrong in life, something you feel needs to change. And that's the basic summation of what anger is. It's wanting something to change. You put everything in that basket, you realize that's a pretty big basket. We need to sort through it.
I really like that definition of anger, wanting, just an indicator of wanting something to change. That's fantastic. And now, so with the different personality styles, there are some of us that are quick to just express that anger and maybe in ways that aren't exactly helpful. And then there are others of us, I tend to be more internal when I process anger, and we just kind of keep it in. And that avoidance is not helpful, is it?
Oh, that definitely isn't. Avoidance is really what I'd call addictive. That's not what we want to use as our primary method of dealing with something needing to change. It triggers all sorts of physiological, even though one may feel, oh, calm, I'm just going to ignore this and be peaceful. That requires internal changes in your brain and in your body to suppress your natural ingrained instincts to respond. And sometimes we don't think of thinking as a behavior, but it is. Mm-hmm. So repressive thinking is an intense form of behavior. Ruminative thinking, where you get stuck on a thought and just go over and over and over. Planning, worry, these are all forms of behavior that we have to also look at. Sounds complicated, doesn't it?
Well, I think most of us can identify with this, though. At some point or another, we use containment, we use avoidance until it's appropriate, right?
Yeah,
but
that's right.
Let's get to the practical tips. Where can we start? What would be a baseline beginning?
Well, I call it taking an emotional inventory. We start with the emotion. We get to the behavior later, even though that's the first thing we like to grab is a reaction. But I think here, where we're really trying to improve the methods we have in life of dealing with anger, needing something to change, you've got to start first with your senses, which is how you perceive what's going on. Sight, sound, smell, that's involved in anger. Well, that's how we figure out what it is needs to change. So you've got to start with your perceptions. The second thing is, perceptions are always associated with memories, and we have to recall, or am I reacting perhaps to memories from way back that may or may not really be relevant to this situation? I may be reacting to how a teacher treated me, or a coach yelled at me, or a band director threw the baton at me. I mean, I can remember that. Threw a drumstick at me from across the band room.
Oh, wow.
Well, you do. And then you make a mistake playing the piano, and suddenly you react with a memory. Uh-oh.
Yes.
And you go, that's not anger. Oh, but it is a form of needing something to change. I want to play it right. I want people to like what I'm... Anyway, you get that. That's part of it. And then the third part is judgment or filtering. So these are all internal. These are parts of the brain's emotional inventory. What am I feeling? What is this like? And what is the priority level that my brain associates with this? Is this something that I feel absolutely in the world must change, and it's the highest priority? I call that kind of God's judgment. I'm doing it because I'm right. Versus, is this something minor that's just irritating me, and I won't use any adjectives here, but it's just really getting under my skin. The kids are making a mess. They're supposed to make messes, but I've had it. So you have to make a judgment call as to what your anger is at. Ending a sentence in a preposition.
Yeah.
But seriously, what are you going to choose to focus or what is your anger focusing on? And it might be split in 3 different areas, but that's where your judgment and your filtering comes in. Don't ignore something that's important, but aim at something that you can make a change positively toward.
I really like that, because it's very practical in the sense that if all of a sudden I'm triggered and I'm hot and bothered, to just quickly say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, where am I right now? Maybe I'm at an 8. And then to look at the trigger, is that disproportionate, or does that really warrant an 8 on the 1 to 10 scale? and 10 being rage. Well, if you find yourself at an 8 and the trigger, if you pull the lens back and you were to assess that on a day when you're less stressed and more calm, what is going on there? I think that's really good to ask yourself those things. And that's part of what you're saying, taking emotional inventory.
That's all part of this emotional inventory. What am I feeling? What's it associated or like? And what am I prioritizing, or why am I prioritizing it? How am I filtering it?
Yeah. So give me an example of when you say, how am I filtering it? What do you mean by that?
Well, I can take the worst extreme of that and use the depiction of someone that is suffering from loss of brain function, like dementia. One of the first and most severe losses in the brain isn't just a memory, but it's of the frontal lobes of the brain ability to filter and make judgment, what's appropriate. And someone losing their ability to filter, become angry at things that are just didn't even happen. The filtering process breaks down. So that's what I mean. Our judgment really involves deciding what is the different parts of what's happening and prioritizing what is really important and what things may be trivial, still important, but not requiring reactive behaviors.
I really like that. I was talking with a young mom recently who, she was teaching her little boy how to write with a pen or a pencil, I guess it was. And he was holding it differently than she had instructed him. And, she was not seeing the result she wanted out of that little guy. And he was like 3, just, learning how to use the pencil. And she was really getting frustrated and was sharing with me how much she was starting to amp up. And we just looked at that. And I said, okay, what's the meaning there? What are you saying? Well, it's really important that he learns how to do this right. And okay, so why is it so important to you that he learn how to do this right in this specific situation right now? She kind of looked at the history of how she grew up, and mistakes weren't okay. She was just expecting something faster than was really realistic. And that was fueling her anger. So when she pulled back the lens and said, wait a minute, is it more fun that he enjoys using a pencil and he can gradually learn over time and perfect that? Do I need to be so angry? And with that shift came a lot more internal peace.
Oh, that's such a good example of doing this inventory we're talking about. What am I feeling? And then looking at the priorities involved. It's like, it is important for him to learn to do a good job, but it's not so important that I need to be that angry right now. I'll just show him later.
Right. That's so good. And, as a mom, I remember thinking about those things you're teaching your kids and all the learning process that goes with that, and how important it is to make those times enjoyable and even fun, because it's in that context of peace, emotional peace, that a child learns more quickly and more efficiently. So I am so excited about talking more about that whole behavioral component that you mentioned earlier. So can we continue this conversation?
I'll really look forward to it.
Okay, great. In our next episode, we'll talk about not only how to take emotional inventory, we'll take it to the next step that Werner mentioned about taking behavioral inventory and learning how to work with our behaviors differently. So between now and then, I hope you have a great week. Enjoy any of the other videos in this series. Go on over to pamvredevelt.com, and we have a brand new PDF download for you. It's actually an infographic that shows you exactly what is going on in the brain when you're hot and bothered and frustrated. Until next time, Dr. Swarner, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And we'll look forward to seeing you soon.